This video will discuss on using functions and libraries in your programs. So probably you have already used a cout statement or a cin, which are actually, sometimes I call them statements, but they're actually functions. Even though we are usually using a redirect with them, you know, the two less than signs or the two greater than signs after the cin. Okay, so now these functions, cout and cin, are contained in a library called iostream. Iostream is a file that's in your system, C++ compiler system directory that contains these two functions. And programming languages are rather limited in what they do. So for most programming languages, you'll be including or importing, or however they call it, different libraries or packages or whatever at the top of your program. In C++, we call it importing libraries, and it expands what your programming language can do now. Okay, so for example, let's look at a library called math.h. And this library has a lot of mathematical functions in them. And one function is the square root function. Now, when you use a function, we also say you are calling the function. So when I call the square root function, you put the name of the function, and then it will always be followed by an open close parentheses, and then you put parameters inside the parentheses. Parameters are what you send to the function so that it can make its calculation. Another name for parameters is arguments. You send it arguments or you send it parameters. So for the square root function, you would send it a parameter or an argument such as 16. I'll skip to the new line. I'll get rid of that. And so now think about a function as a separate piece of code that's in this math.h library. And that function is named square root, and it takes one parameter. It takes one integer parameter, or actually it'll take a float also. But you send it the parameter, it does its calculation, and it returns the result back to your main program here. Using the same return statement that we're doing right here. See, main is a function, and when main exits, return exits the function, it returns 0, in this case back to your operating system. Okay, so let's run it. And so this one returns 4, the square root function, when I do square root of 16. Of course, I hard-coded a number in there. It could also be a variable that you put in there. Okay, so now let's look at another function in the math.h library called pow, or power of. Now this one takes 2 parameters. And if you send multiple parameters or arguments, you do the first parameter, then you do a comma, and then the second parameter. So in this case, this will raise 2 to the power of 8. And you're probably already familiar with the powers of 2, the binary powers of 2, because you see them all over the place. You know, this is 256, 2 to the power of 8. You know, it's like you see that when you go buy a phone. Do you want the power, you know, it's always powers of 2. The amount of memory, do you want 128 gigabyte or 256 gigabyte? And that's just because the electronics industry is doubling the amount of memory on these chips. Okay, so now there's plenty of other, you can look them up, there's plenty of other functions you can use in this math.h library. And there's going to be so many other libraries. Like when if you create a program that's pretty advanced that needs to do create windows on the screen, then there'll be a library for that needs to do sound, needs to do graphics, needs to communicate to the internet. There will be libraries for all of those things. And so if you have an advanced program, you're going to see a lot of pound includes. Okay, and so now let's talk about this little pound right here. Anytime in C++ a line begins with a pound sign or number sign, that is a pre-compiler directive, meaning it executes these before it it compiles these things or executes these includes before it compiles your program. Okay, so literally what it's doing is just grabbing these files, the iostream file and the math.h file, and putting them right here in your code. And so then when you try to execute a function out of them, the compiler sees the functions because they've been put right there in your code. Okay, now let's look at another library, the stdlib.h library. And this one has quite a few functions. Again, you can look them up. One of the functions is the random number function, which gives you a random number, even though if you do it just like this, it's not going to really be a random number. I have a separate video on random numbers that goes all through that. They're actually pseudo-random numbers, but actually every time I run my program, it's going to give 41. So you see that, oh, that's not really a random number. But there's things that we do to make them simulate better random numbers. But that's another video. Okay, another function that's in there is the system function. Okay, so a system function executes an operating system command. Now, if you are on Windows, then if you open up the command prompt, these would be the operating system commands that you could execute. If you're on Mac, then it would be the terminal. Okay, so this is going to be a little different what you can do here. So everything I do is not going to work on Mac on terminal because the operating system commands are different. But this is the way you interface your program to the operating system. So just for example, you could ping a website. Packet Internet Groper sends packets of data to test the connection right there. Okay, so anything I do here, I can do inside my program using the system command. So the system, you can just put it on a line by itself, the system, and your command needs to be within quotations like that. And so this should work on Mac as well as on Windows right here. So you see when I ran it, it launched my terminal and then it did that. Even though on Windows it just does 4 pings, on Mac I think it does continuous. I think you need to do like a Control-C to cancel it, or you could just close your terminal. Okay, so another example is you could run a Windows program. So on Windows you would open up a command prompt. And so I can actually launch programs. So for example, the calculator on Windows, if I type that, it launches the calculator right here. So I could do that from within my program, and this is not going to work on Mac. Okay, so just for example, let's go ahead and do that. Let's just launch the calculator and run my program, and it launched the calculator. Okay, so once again, this is how we interface. Okay, so now one thing I want you to do is once again, think about functions. You send it a parameter and it returns the result, because you need to think about that, because when you get to the video on writing functions, that's what you're going to do. You're going to write some code that takes one or more parameters and then returns the result. Okay, I think that's all I was going to cover for this video.